All right. Welcome to yesterday's news for August 13th, 2018. This is, I think, my fifth try now. I've had multiple camera issues and lost my place and said stupid things a couple of times too. So here's to fifth time's the charm. So as you can see, I am not at work tonight. I didn't work late tonight, so I'm recording from my pottery studio. And the big advantage of that is I get to have whiskey while I record my thoughts about things that happened. So over the weekend, there was the Unite the Right to rally. I don't really care about that particularly. I figure anybody who thought that naming a rally Unite the Right to was a good idea is probably not on my team. So I don't much care who they are because that was it's just. So, but it brought up to me an interesting topic to discuss, and that is the rise and fall of the alt-right. And I thought it would be valuable to sort of document my recollections of what happened, because in this season of transition in the media, as the old media is dying and the new media doesn't quite know what it's doing yet, and we're at this cultural crossroads, and we're having a lot of very Orwellian narrative flipping and misinformation and all that going around, that it's going to be very hard for future generations to really piece together what happened from the mainstream data sources. So I thought it might be good to record my personal recollections of how it all went down. So in order to understand the climate that gave rise to the alt-right, I think it makes sense to go back to the 2012 election. And honestly, before that, but the 2012 was the turning point. So for many, many years, the Democrats had this strategy that as soon as any Republican frontrunner, they would find some excuse to label them a racist or a sexist or something, and the mainstream of the party would naturally not want to be associated with a racist or a sexist, and distance themselves, and that person would lose. And so we had a series of cases where essentially the Democrats picked the Republican nominee for president, and that left people very frustrated. But there was still sort of the mainstream strategy on the right was, if we can find that guy who's just clean enough that they can't possibly come up with anything on him, then it'll be okay, and we'll win virtuously, and it'll be great. And so in 2012 we picked Mitt Romney, who was the least offensive human being to ever walk the face of the earth, to quote somebody. I don't remember who I'm quoting there, but Glenn Beck or Ben Shapiro, one of those guys, I don't remember. But anyways, basically, he was that. If there was ever a guy that they would never have any dirt on, it was this guy, and it didn't matter. They did it to him anyways, and it worked. And there was a growing pool of skepticism within the Republican base that at that point grew to a majority, and that had some interesting results, some good, some bad. The good news is that basically it short-circuited that tactic that the Democrats had used to basically rule outside the will of the people. Essentially is what it came down to, because they were very good at winning elections even though people didn't agree with what they wanted to do. and so that was a good thing to break that down. But the problem came in that twofold problem. One, we had this, which isn't necessarily all bad, but a very strong anti-political correctness movement on the right that has its place and has its virtues, but can go quite awry if you start to think that political incorrectness is a virtue in and of itself. But that came about, and at the same time, we basically became fully 100% skeptical of any claims of racism, sexism, etc. And because that it had been used as a weapon for so long that the words didn't really mean anything anymore, and people just stopped caring. So that unfortunately left the right open to, I guess, be infiltrated by the actual racists, and that was a bad thing. And at that time, we have also, so that's setting the stage. Now that's the cultural conditions going into the 2016 election. And during the 2016 election, we start seeing the left pushing anti-free speech things. We start seeing, so there's a big, free speech comes to the front of the line. And so free speech absolutists find themselves in the position of defending people's right to say things that they don't agree with. And then that obviously leads to confusion because people take that as agreement. Basically, so you've got the sort of the grassroots of the Republican Party are in this, rebel against political correctness mode, along with we don't believe anybody who calls anybody a racist, and then you had the actual racists who were, racism is a fundamentally collectivist idea. So, they would generally fit on the left, but part of for the last 50 years or so, the Democrat Party has been using them as a scapegoat and telling them they belong in the Republican Party. The Republican Party doesn't want anything to do with them. Democrats don't want anything to do with them. And they've been kind of, out in the cold, but they think that their home is in the Republican Party, even though nobody wants them. And so when all this chaos erupts, you have this movement, or it's really not a movement, it's a series of micro movements, an agglomeration of different groups that range from the actual racists, the white nationalists, to your punk rock libertarians who are anti-establishment but conservative ideologically. So, and at that time, it's like nobody knows who's who. And so, we're not doing a good job of filtering. And at the same time, the mainstream media is very much bent on making everybody look like they're part of that, the racists that, want to have a white ethno-state in America, which is just an oxymoron. Like, that doesn't make sense. And so you had this thing where a lot of people got caught up basically with their allegiances messed up, and nobody really knew who was who and what was what and who you can trust and who you can't trust. And into that, I think, I know people who are more conspiratorial in their thinking, and they're saying, all these racist guys, the Richard Spencers and whoever else, I don't remember who all was involved, but they're left wing guys, and this is this is like a false flag operation. I don't think that's what happened. I think what happened was that those actual racists took the window of opportunity where the Republicans and the emergent, anti-establishment, conservative, libertarian, right wing were basically had their guard down and weren't vetting people on issues of racism. And so that kind of culminated. And so for years it went on where, is the alt-right a thing? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it just a couple of, internet trolls? Is it a real movement? And everybody had a different answer. And the truth is it was all true. There were good people who were being considered alt-right. People were being called alt-right from David Duke to Dave Rubin, and who are as far apart as you can possibly be. And so it was, in that cloud, there was the punk rock libertarians, there was the actual racists that we wanted to get rid of, but nobody really knew who they were because the mainstream media was accusing everybody of being them. So it was like nobody really knows who's who and who is that we need to kick out, and it really kind of culminated in Charlottesville, where there was a free speech rally earlier, and so I forgot to talk about the monuments. So that was one thing. That I think was a case of the left wanted to push an issue that they knew would split the right and make right-wing people do stupid things. And so that was starting to attack Confederate monuments. And, because conservatives don't like tearing down historical monuments, period. That's just not our thing. And at the same time, it's like, well, but these are monuments to racists that were erected by Democrats, so why are we protecting them? So it's created all this fighting within the right wing. And so again, we have all this free speech stuff going on. And one of the things that attracts racists to the right is that the right generally stands up for free speech. And right now, racism is not a popular position. And so if you are a racist, you are, in favor of somebody standing up for free speech. And so, and we do that. We stand up for free speech even when we don't like it, and we do the same thing for the Marxists and the everybody else, because that's free speech is important and it's worth the risk and all that. So it was like a few weeks before there was this free speech rally that was, what was, a good normal right-wing thing. And then this thing starts to emerge that people are calling Unite the Right. And nobody really knows what to make of it. Again, the media is saying that it's a bunch of racists, but they called the free speech rally a bunch of racists, and they were all just free speech advocates. And so we didn't really know what to make of it. But then as time went on and the event got closer and closer, we started to realize, well, no, some of the people they're inviting really are the racists. And a lot of the more mainstream people who had been invited to speak, started dropping out. And basically, by the time it happened, anybody I would have agreed with, who had been invited and had been scheduled to speak, had dropped out by the time the event actually happened. And we know the history. That was at least fairly accurately recorded, and that was a bad situation. And I think one of the things that tipped people off to start being suspicious about it was that they called it Unite the Right, and that's not a right-wing name. It's just not the kind of thing that we do. Where the American right is an alliance between libertarians and conservatives, and libertarians don't like uniting anything, and conservatives don't like being labeled the right, and so that just didn't seem like a legitimate name, and it turned out not to be. So that spelled the death of the alt-right. Anything that was good that was being labeled the alt-right rapidly distanced itself and became something different. And oddly enough, they stopped tearing down monuments, which is interesting because I think it was a political move in the beginning. And it kind of, it's like anybody who was actually involved is over and done with it, but they still really, really want to have this fight happen. And the left is still really, really trying to spin the narrative that they're the anti-racists. And but it's like you can't push identity politics and then say you're not a racist. It's sorry, it's just not how it works. And but they're desperate to redefine racism in such a way that they can put it on the right, and desperate to find fringe groups that are racist that they can claim are part of the right. And and the rest of us just go on ignoring them. And I think that's what we should do. I don't think, because here's the thing. It's like what these guys wanted was the news coverage. It's like a couple dozen people. This is not a powerful group. This is not a movement. This is like, this is a handful of people. And it's like the Westboro Baptist. I think they're the equivalent of the Westboro Baptist group. It's like they're just idiots who are small in number, but they can be outrageous enough to trigger counter protests and get news coverage, and then that plays into the narratives and people trying to spin it for power in every direction. And I think that's all stupid. I think we really just need to ignore them. And they'll go away because they really aren't there anyways. It's like I said, it's a very small number of people, and as bad as they are, they're not dangerous without any power, and they're not big enough to have any power. So, just remember that not everything not everything with a label is that label. Especially these days. But when something actually turns up to be that, just ignore it. Don't feed it. I liked, Morgan Freeman's comment several years ago that, somebody asked him about racism. He's like, the only way we're going to make racism go away, we got to stop talking about it all the time. We got to stop making it an issue, because it's like, it's as long as we keep giving these fringe handful of people airtime, then it's going to keep being a problem, and we're going to keep having people angry at them. And, because it's like, if we just ignore them, then they're just a bunch of idiots. It's like, am I up in arms about the flat earthers? No, I think they're silly. and stupid. And you know, I think we should look at racists the same way instead of trying to blow it up into this, grand fear that because a couple dozen people showed up to walk down the street that we're heading back to the days of Reconstruction, and it's not. It's just a handful of idiots that are perfectly okay to ignore, and so I think I'm kind of rambling on that point now. But with that, I hope that was informative, and at least get my recollection of what happened down in one stream of consciousness, and maybe if enough people do this, maybe someday the actual story will be understood. With that, I hope you enjoyed. Like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow.